Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today, and welcome to this very first event showcasing Schools 2030's research partners. And this is a very special event for our program. It is the first time that we're bringing all together in one virtual room Schools 2030 staff from the global level, as well as across all 10 of our countries, all our technical partners, our research partners, as well as our community of donors and a small number of external partners who have supported our program over the past 2 years. So it's a really exciting opportunity for all of us to be together in one space and to hear some of the interesting lessons that are emerging from the work of our research partners. Next slide, please, Sarah. So by way of an agenda, I'm going to speak for a few minutes just to provide a little introduction and welcome to everybody, and then turn it over to our research teams. We have 6 teams altogether, and they'll have 1 or 2 partners from each team just speak for a minute or 2 to provide a little bit of background information on the research projects and what they hope to find through their work together. If you'd like more detail, of course, that was shared via email, and after the session, we can share some background reading and other documents related to some of the details of the research. Today, they'll provide just an overview of their work, so we leave as much time as possible for questions and discussion. After they've spoken, we'll have a full 40 minutes for some further questions and open up for audience Q&A as well. Next slide, please, Sarah. Thanks. So as everybody will know, the Schools 2030 program supports teachers and learners to co-develop holistic innovations, education innovations, using human-centered design principles. And the teachers, together with their students, implement, test, and iterate these innovations across an academic year, every year, starting from our launch year in 2021 and going all the way till 2030. This process is underway now across our 10 program countries, and we're already seeing some very exciting, very inspiring teacher-driven innovations being put into practice. Please do check our website, schools2030.org, as we regularly update with news, resources, and innovations from across our 10 country teams and 1,000 schools. So we believe that in the year 2030, when the world is assessing the progress we've made on SDG 4, our program will have built a substantial evidence base on what works to improve teaching and learning through teacher-driven, school-based education innovation. This evidence will come from our teachers and schools, but it will also come from our research partners, this inaugural cohort, which we're celebrating today. So this group of 6 partners joined our program just from its inception year. They're just only now in the earliest stages of their research. And that allows them to learn alongside the rest of our team about the contribution and impact of the Schools 2030 program and how we're impacting learning and teaching. So as I said, most are only in the earliest stages of the research projects, but over the next 18 to 24 months, these 6 teams will work together and alongside our schools to investigate all of their different and independent research questions, all of which are working in different countries and with different age cohorts to explore learning and teaching across our program. In a moment, I'm going to open up so that we can hear from each one of these teams and learn about their research. But I wanted first to note that Schools 2030 research partners are supported through our very generous partnership with the Jacobs Foundation, who supports not only this inaugural group of researchers, but will also support 3 new partners to join our network next year in 2022, again in 23, and again in 24, adding a total of 9 more research partners over the coming 3 years. I'm very excited to have Jelgia Fetz here from the Jacobs Foundation with us today, and I'd love to just invite Jelgia to speak for a minute about this partnership and the importance of research in driving education systems change. So Jelgia, over to you for a moment.
And I've promised you I'll be short, I'll be brief, just a minute.
You take all the time you need, my dear.
So why are we supporting this program, and why are we supporting these research projects? I think in the context of our new strategy, we hope that we have a unique competence here as a foundation, and that is really to help generate, help translate, and also help transfer research. That's really what we have in mind. So fostering evidence, supporting evidence, but then also take it to action and take it to systems change. So with that in mind, our aim is really here to support educational research that addresses a set of key questions that are relevant to our strategy as well. How and what are children learning in the context of Schools 2030? Increase our understanding how holistic skills, including social emotional skills, including the non-cognitive skills, are taught and learned at classroom level in the context of Schools 2030. What factors can explain variability in these learning outcomes, and ultimately how these school-driven innovations, and I think that's what's really important here, that it's really school-driven innovations happening in this holistic learning can lead to the systems change that we have in mind. And that's a minute something what I promised.
Thank you so much, Gelgia, and thanks for joining us today as well. I would just like to quickly introduce another very important person, the very newest member of our Schools 2030 team, Ellen Smith. Ellen has just joined, I think 2 weeks ago now, as our Global Research Coordinator for Schools 2030. And in this role, she'll not only support the current as well as future research partners, but also work to ensure we're really drawing together and synergizing the learning and evidence across all of our research, but also our wider program. So we're not treating these as discrete projects or pillars, but as a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. So Ellen is actually on a pre-booked leave before she was hired for this role, but she is very graciously joining us today so that she can participate in this event. So Ellen, are you here to say hello?
I am here, yes. Can you hear and see me?
I can hear and see you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm really thrilled to have just joined the Schools 2030 team. And today sounds like a great event. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about all the different discussions and points to link up that come out today. And great to see you on the call.
Thanks so much, Ellen. And thanks for joining us even on your long booked leave. So now, without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce each of our 6 research teams. Each is going to take a few minutes to introduce their projects, but only a few minutes for a sort of summary of their project. We've shared more deep background material on each project. You will have received that yesterday by email. After each of our 6 teams have spoken, I'll facilitate a bit more discussion and then open up to audience questions and comments. So the first team I'm very pleased to introduce is a research consortium led by Bela Jamil of ITA Pakistan and John Mugo of Zizi Afrique. And Saba Saeed will speak on behalf of this team today. So Saba, I'm going to turn it over to you. And Sarah, you can move one slide ahead, please.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Hello, everyone. It's very good to be here. As Bronwyn said, I'm representing Idare Talim Waghi, and we are joined by our colleagues from Zizi Afrique. Both John and Ekata are here. The research is titled Catalyzing Locally Rooted Education Solutions to Improve Holistic Learning Outcomes. It's a mixed methods research, which is intended to produce actionable evidence on linkages between non-academic skills and academic learning within the specific schooling context. The study will take place across 2 countries of Pakistan and in Kenya. In the sample, we have chosen our 25 schools and 2 youth centers. The target group within the schools that we'll be specifically looking at is primary to late secondary. So maybe 10-year-olds to 15-year-olds will be targeted. We are looking forward to learning more about the approaches that the schools have adopted in their schools to implement non-academic learning in classroom practices. What kind of obstacles do they face? Are there workforce capacity to deliver non-academic skills in schools? What is the impact on academic learning of students? What are the political economy factors that barriers or enablers that somehow affect the implementation of such learning, and what's the role of equity and inclusivity in the approach towards non-academic learning? So these are some of the research themes that our study aims to look at. It's going to be both qualitative and quantitative. We'll be looking at some of the tools from grit scale and social skills inventory to measure outcomes in non-academic skills. And we'll be also conducting focus group discussions with parents, schools, leaders, teachers, staff members, frontline providers, community members, government officials to understand the political economy situation and the factors that impact systems-wide change. The project activities have already kickstarted in 2 of the regions of Mombasa and Chitral, and Gilgit and Lamu. The other 2 regions will follow soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Saba, for that great summary, very brief, but gives us a really great taste of the project. I'm going to move on now to hear from our next partners, a consortium between University of Nazarbayev and University of Toronto, and Duishan Shamatov will speak on behalf of this team. So Duishan, over to you.
Yes, hello everyone. Very briefly, very briefly about our team, and I will request Stephen to speak about our research very briefly. Our research team in 3 countries, very purposefully built. Everyone brings very valuable experience to conduct research. Sarfaros Niyazov, Stephen Bahri. Sarfaros will bring a lot of education policy and the qualitative research. Stephen Bahri, language education, qualitative research. Mehmet Karakus from Coventry, he will bring a lot of statistics and quantitative research. Miravzal Tajik, my colleague, he's an educational leadership, and myself, Duishan Shamatov. And our research title is School-Based Education Stakeholders' Perspectives on Quality of Education in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan in the context of School 2030. Stephen, here you are.
Well, our overall purpose is to find out what kinds of solutions might be culturally relevant and contextually workable in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan schools, the bulk of which are in rural areas. So we want to get at the understandings of stakeholders, which includes teachers, principals, but also students and parents and community members, about what the aims of education are and what their understandings of quality is in achieving those aims, and then understanding how it is, what sorts of obstacles arise and how they might deal with those obstacles. Our study is a mixed method study. There will be a large scale quantitative survey, and then there will be smaller scale focus group interviews in the schools, and 30 sites overall, 15 in Kyrgyzstan, 15 in Tajikistan. A large number of them will be from the AKF Schools 2030, but we'll also be choosing a few schools from outside the AKF schools. And so we hope to deepen, broaden, and ground our knowledge, and not only what policymakers think, but we want to identify what the local stakeholders see as the key aims of education and how it's carried out, what is quality in terms of the way education is achieved, and find any differences between the 2 that can be improved through this kind of dialogue, and then they can have targeted solutions to these. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephen, Duishan. And I think that question around quality and how we decide and how we measure that will come up more in discussion. But let's move on now to the 3rd research partner. I'd love to invite Renaud Komba from UNICEF Innocenti to speak about the Data Must Speak research in Tanzania.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Hi, Bronwyn. Thank you so much. So the Data Must Speak is not a new initiative. It was created in 2014 with 2 technical components assistance with ministries of education. But since 2019, we have kickstarted this new research component that aims at finding out and understanding positive design behaviors and practices in best performing schools and the various ways to scale them in more schools so that we can ensure that every child, including marginalized students, either because of their ethnicities, because of their gender, disabilities, or even their access to digital technologies, are getting the necessary foundational literacy and numeracy skills. We're partnering with Schools 2030 to expand the DMS research to Tanzania, and we're very excited about this. But also because Jacobs Foundation is on this call, we are also partnering with the Jacobs Foundation to expand the Data Must Speak research in Brazil, where Schools 2030 is also implementing their program. This research is a 5-staged in-country research. You can see the 5 blue dots in the middle of the slide. And that will involve various methodologies: quantitative, qualitative, behavioral insights, implementation research, and scaling science. And we will do this through a co-creation and co-implementation from the get-go with 5 different types of stakeholders at country level. You can see the graph on your right, that it is with ministries of education, school level stakeholders, parents and communities, local and international academics, so development partners. And finally, this research is a little bit different from other research, as it really focusing, very similar actually to Schools 2030. It really focuses on valuing the local capacity and the grassroots solutions that are already present and already being implemented. And so we do this following a 3-pronged approach. The first one is to strengthen in-country technical capacity to manage education data and to generate evidence. The second one is to leverage on the data sets that already exist. This is the case in Tanzania, this is the case in Brazil. And finally is to make sure that we're taking the time to listen to schools so that we can identify local positive behaviors and practices in their contexts. Thank you, Bronwyn.
Thanks so much, Renaud, and looking forward to discussing more about that interesting project with you. Our next team is from University of California, Berkeley. This team's led by Jan Engelman, and today will be represented by Rebecca Zhu. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm wrong. I have not looked properly at the order of the slides. Our next team is a consortium with University of Dar es Salaam, University of Notre Dame, and Right to Play International. And we'll be hearing, I think, from both Dr. Vendelin and Nikit Desa from University of Dar es Salaam and University of Notre Dame, respectively, to give us a little introduction into their project. So I'll turn it over to you, Vendelin and Nikit.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning. For us, it's good evening here in Tanzania, colleagues. For us, it's lovely to be part of this family. So a brief introduction about our project. It's a consortium of 3 organizations, 2 academic or research institutions, but also 1 implementing partner, Right to Play. And we have 7 members who will be overseeing this project. And our focus is on effects of common attributes of design thinking and play-based learning approach in raising holistic learning outcomes at primary schools in Tanzania. And our aim is to develop and test bottom-up measures of social-emotional learning skills, but also to fill gaps on contextually relevant social-emotional learning skills in Tanzania. So we want to identify some of these emotional learning skills and to also see which ones are relevant in our context. But we also want to test effectiveness of common elements of human-centered pedagogies. And in particular here, we're referring to the 2 learning approaches, design thinking and place-based learning. But we also aim to develop a formative assessment tool for teachers to monitor the whole class, but also one-to-one pupil, but to also support teachers with real-time corrective action tool that caters students' needs. And so for us, our research is in Tanzania, 3 regions. This is Dar es Salaam, Lindi, and Mara, covering 4 districts. And the study approach or design is a mixed method. So we have qualitative, but also quantitative. And we have 3 phases. The first phase, we want to explore these social emotional learning skills through ethnographic research. And then secondly, we want to pilot the social emotional learning skills that we captured during phase 1, but also for phase 3, we want to validate the social emotional learning competency and skills. And we will be covering 40 schools. This is 10 from each school. So in terms of output, we have a report, brochures, but also formative assessment tool, and also policy brief, but we'll also have peer-reviewed papers, and we'll be presenting in some conferences. Over from you, thank you. But if Nikit has something to add, please kindly welcome. Asante.
Nothing further for me, thank you. Back to you, Bronwyn.
Thank you both so much. And now on to what I think will be our University of Berkeley team on the next slide. Great. Thank you for that. So here is the team from University of Berkeley led by Jan Engelman, and I think Rebecca Zhu is here to speak on behalf of the team today.
Yeah, hi. With our research, the rationale behind what we're doing is that teachers and researchers frequently use learning materials and assessment tools involving picture stimuli. And often these materials and tools are developed in really high income Western settings like the US or the UK. But we've recently really started applying them to a lot of different cultures and contexts worldwide. But it's still unclear how and when young kids across these different cultures and contexts actually begin to understand pictures. And while kids in these high income contexts like the US, UK, or Nairobi really, are surrounded by picture books and televisions and billboards, kids from low income or rural areas might have less experience with these kinds of pictures. So broadly, our research investigates whether kids' early experience with pictures is related to 1, their understanding of pictures, 2, their ability to learn from pictures, and 3, their performance on, cognitive or socio-emotional assessments involving pictures. So it's possible that we'll find that picture comprehension is intuitive for kids, regardless of early environment, be it high income, low income, urban, rural. Or it could be the case that picture comprehension requires early experience with pictures that only some kids have or are getting. So we're going to conduct basic picture comprehension tasks with kids living in Lamu and Mombasa in Kenya who have varying amounts of early experience with pictures. And hopefully, given that, these classroom learning materials and early assessments involve picture stimuli, our research will help teachers and policymakers just create effective learning materials and assessment tools for kids, not only from high income backgrounds, but these more diverse global backgrounds as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And then finally, last but not least, I'd like to turn over to Eddie Brummelman from the University of Amsterdam, who's part of a team that also includes David Yeager from University of Texas at Austin and Hayon Lee from Yale. So Eddie, over to you.
Thanks, Bronwyn. So I'm super excited to be here today and see you all. So the purpose of the work that we do is to understand inequality. And inequality is one of the most defining challenges of our time. And it has increased quite dramatically over the past few decades. So what we see in schools is that kids from poor and working class backgrounds are far more likely to underperform than their middle class and affluent peers, even though they might be equally gifted. And we are interested in how we can help reduce these inequalities, which have increased even more since the COVID-19 outbreak. So due to school closures, many kids from disadvantaged backgrounds have reduced learning opportunities. And we work with Pakistan and Kyrgyzstan, and Amna and Nazira are here today. And what we see in these countries is that kids, especially kids from rural areas, have reduced access to online or remote learning opportunities. So now that schools reopen, one of the key challenges is for teachers to help reduce inequalities and giving appropriate learning experiences to kids from these disadvantaged backgrounds. And what we want to understand is what are teacher practices that can help reduce inequality. And one concept that we are interested in is the growth mindset approach. So which teacher practices can help cultivate the growth mindset in kids. So the belief that intelligence is something that can grow and develop by exerting effort or trying new strategies or asking for help when needed. And that's something that we want to study through interviews with teachers, but also assessments in teachers and students. And a long-term goal is to develop a solution together with teachers that can help cultivate a growth mindset to reduce inequality at scale. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddie. And with that, we have heard a little brief piece from each one of our research partners. And before we open up to hear questions or comments from everybody here, I have a few questions I'd like to ask our panelists just to dig a little bit more deeply into some of their projects. So Sarah, maybe we can stop screen sharing for this bit and then we can see the faces of everybody who's able to turn their videos on. Thank you so much. So a question really across all 6 projects. Several, almost all, I would say, are looking in some way at effective teaching strategies to improve learning outcomes, including both foundational and social emotional skills. So I'd love to hear from the teams a little bit about what you hope to learn through your projects and how you think this might support more effective teaching within and beyond Schools 2030. Anyone like to start us off?
Well, one thing I could say, for instance, is that I think one of the really unique opportunities that Schools 2030 generates is to study these questions from a cross-cultural perspective, because many of the studies that are available on effective teaching practices are based on very restricted samples, and many are not grounded in local cultures. So I think that's one of the great opportunities that this project generates, and something that I'm really curious about.
Thanks, Eddie.
I can also go. I think our study will help us to understand really with an empirical research, the solid evidence, rather than here like an anecdotal evidence. We may feel that there is a lot of good thing, quality education is happening in different parts of both Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, but we need some evidence, very statistical but in-depth qualitative evidence that we can really back up and build on that. And instead of heavily relying on externally developed ideas, giving also the empowerment and the autonomy and voice to the teachers, practitioners. This is, I think, we will hope.
Great, thanks.
This is Bela from Pakistan. So I think, the fact that I'd mentioned this last time, that, the fact that we are looking at what were closed systems to what are becoming more open systems, especially I'd like to see, across the countries, the role of parents and communities as they interact with schools and teachers and children, the whole business of.
Oh, Bela, we've just lost you. I don't know if anybody from the ITA ZZ team wants to jump in for Bela while her connection is sorted.
Yeah. Here is Agatha from Kenya, ZZ Afrique Foundation. As Bela deconnects, one of the things we hope to learn is to be able to answer the question of how can we at Aga Khan Foundation and the network be able to deliver, measure, and deliver a more contextualized, local solutions for our projects, for our schools, locally grown solutions. How can we deliver and monitor and assess using local solutions that are implemented, that are innovated by our very own teachers? Because what works for us here, once we are able to get those innovations out, then we can also engage at the national and the global discourse on education, and be able also for Kenyan and Pakistan situation, be able to fill in the gaps that exist for our curriculum. Brian, thank you.
Thanks so much, Agatha. And Bela, I'm not sure if you've been able to reconnect or if any other partners want to reflect a bit on this question.
Yes, for us in Tanzania, we have picked at least 4 research sites that are relatively poorly performing. So for us, the first learning lesson that we want to draw from the field is how teachers are struggling, to keep up with the performing better schools or even regions, but also the kind of local relevant resources that could be used by teachers, to support the education of the pupils, but also to, as I've said, to keep up with the schools that are performing, because none of the schools that we will be visiting is making at least 50%, above the average of the national examination results. So that is the lesson that we are really looking forward. Over from me, thank you.
Thanks, Vendelin. Renaud, I know you're working as well in Tanzania and perhaps in some overlapping districts. Do you have any reflections on this question around what, through the Data Must Speak research, what might we learn about effective teaching, or how might we improve effective teaching practices?
Yeah, thanks, Bronwyn. I think what might we learn is a big question, and this is why we're doing the Data Must Speak research, because we just don't know what we're going to find. We don't know what are going to be those positive divine, those kind of like special behaviors and practices that school level stakeholders are putting in place in certain schools only, that are making them perform better in terms of, student learning outcome, in terms of retention, in terms of equity. So I think this is why we're doing this research. We're excited about it. What we are seeing in general, and this is really the rationale for Data Must Speak, and for it being implemented in 13 countries across 3 continents, is that when we take all of the MS database, those education management information system data, and we're looking at the variables of, the input variables. So whether or not a school has electricity, whether or not they have access to toilets, whether or not, how many textbooks they have per students, all of those kind of inputs that are given to the schools. When we control for all of them, using econometrics, we realize that there is a very large gap. There is approximately, on average, across country, around 80% that we just cannot explain. We cannot explain why, students are performing that well or that bad in a school, given all of those inputs that we get from MS. And this is why the research is happening. It's happening because we think that actually this 80%, or at least a portion of those 80%, can be explained by some special teachers, some special head teachers that are doing things differently. And we want to capture that. We want to identify this. And this is why, I was mentioning valuing what is already existing, because those local stakeholders are resilient and they are finding solutions to the issues that they're encountering every day. So it's about taking the time to identify those solutions with them, and then after that, scaling it potentially through the system.
Thanks a lot, Renaud. And I think we've heard a lot in your response, in everybody's responses, around an interest in the teacher perspective, in contextualization, in localization. And this brings to mind a question that I think again resonates across your projects, which is how do we understand what effective teaching is, or indeed what quality learning is across these different contexts? Is it something that is sort of contextually nuanced? Is it something that is defined differently, maybe by each team? So I'd love to just open up a question around quality. What do we mean by quality? How are we measuring quality? How are we approaching that? And does it look different in Tanzania than Pakistan, than Kyrgyzstan, than in Kenya?
I'm trying to come back. I've had very bad internet connections here, and I'm hoping I can salvage. So I think one of the most exciting parts of this project is that we are looking at a spectrum. We're not just looking at early years. We're not just looking at foundational literacy and numeracy. We are looking at social emotional skills and non-cognitive skills. So it offers a spectrum, and obviously in that, the notion of quality, it'll be very exciting to see how we are defining those thresholds for quality and how they fit in with what are seen as the global indicators for quality through the frameworks that are there, global proficiency frameworks, or is that something more which gives students the ability for adapting to new contexts, to new situations, to how they use their that adaptability of the cognitive and the emotional skills that they gather. Now, how are we going to measure all of that is going to be, and across countries, is going to be very exciting. And how does it then again feed back into a system level prism? Because I think at the end of the day, we are making a case. As in our case, we've seen from our catch-up programs, in our recent external evaluation, it said that the non-cognitive skills became a trigger for better academic skills. Now, all of that means, how are we measuring all of this? And how are we going to convince people and policymakers and people who are involved with competencies to look at those aspects of quality which really make children and students much more holistically prepared for life and for a life they cannot imagine in these very turbulent times. So I think that's going to be very fascinating, especially in contexts where quality is very straitjacketed in terms of how you measure quality, of what is given, and what we are trying to expand surely in what I think is very nicely called the positive deviance. Well, how do the positive deviants look at quality?
Sorry, can I just also add from the ITA side, Bronwyn?
Sure, and hi, Manaza.
I think it's all the more important. I think everyone in this group will be very aware of this, that, the fact that, teaching quality and what teachers are and what teachers do and who they are, they don't do these things in isolation of each other. And I think of the environment around them. And I think one of the things that we have found in the last 18 months or so on the work that we have done on teachers and teaching practices is that in the pandemic, we have become even more aware that teachers play like incredible roles in their communities. They play incredible roles in children's lives, and they also have a huge amount of responsibility. So, how are they actually managing this within the classroom in which they're teaching two differently, children of different abilities with the resources that they have? And I think at least from the tools that I've looked at for the Pakistan team, what we're trying to get at is whether the resource availability within the classrooms and the external environment within which teachers operate also have an impact on ultimately the kind of outcomes that they're able to achieve for the children within their classrooms, whether they are cognitive or non-cognitive outcomes. I did want to add this, that this is all the more important in the post kind of COVID, I can't say post-COVID, after seeing what has happened during COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Manaza, for raising that. Purity, I see that you had your hand raised.
Yes, Brennan, thanks. I think for me, what really bothers my mind is this aspect of contextualization, because I think it borders also on the quality of the metrics that you develop. And I've been lucky to be among the team of people developing metrics to measure some of these SEL. And one of the things we have realized is that as much as we are contextualizing, these need to localize. And today we were just exploring some of the scenarios that we have created. And we had a very nice scenario where 90% of the people who are working on that say, this is a very good contextual scenario, but 10% said it doesn't work for my community. And so the question for me, and this is something I've been asking myself, is if, and looking at most of the metrics we make will now coming to regional, whether it is East Africa, having a region within the context. The question is, how then do we make the assumption that even in those regions that we have contextualized, even when we know that within the regions there are different communities with different understanding and with different definitions of some of these aspects. And I think if that is not addressed, then I think we'll be subjecting our learners to things that are not within the local context, even as we say we are contextualizing. So there is an element of going local, even in our adaptation, and not looking at it like a region. If I'm comparing Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, I think we are totally very different. And also in Kenya, we have 66 recognized communities, which also have different definitions and way of looking at this, especially on SEL. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Purity. I think that's just such an important point. And I know it's come up in a discussion we had a few weeks ago with this group around even just within any given community, some are more rural or some are more urban, and the way quality and context differ there. I've got a few hands up. I'm going to go to Jan and then to Dushan, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bronwyn. Hi, everyone. My name is Jan. I'm part of the team that Rebecca presented, that studies picture comprehension. And actually, I mean, I had my hand raised before Purity started speaking, but I actually wanted to make exactly the same point as Purity, where I really, really very much like this focus on context. And the specific question that we are asking is really, can we bring teaching materials that were developed in one context into a completely different context? And, you know, this goes even to the sort of most basic cognitive capacities of us, like picture comprehension. So, you know, just to give you an example here, I have my morning teacup here. So, you know, if I point at this picture and I tell you cat, you probably immediately understand what I mean by this, but children who grow up in contexts where they're not exposed to many pictures, they might not at all understand what this thing here is. So Rebecca even actually already has some exciting data showing that children who grow up in contexts where they're not exposed to a lot of pictures, they have real difficulties learning from pictures. And yeah, so really sort of questioning the context where we develop certain materials and then the context where we use these materials is, I think, or as I see it, one of the greatest strengths of the Schools 2030 approach.
Thanks so much, Jan, for that. And I think it's great that the diversity also of sort of academic disciplines. So Jan and there's others as well in the group who come from a psychology background and have that lens. We also have economists and educationalists. So it's great to have such a diverse group helping us shed light on those questions. Dushan, I think you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, and while looking at the quality, we came to conclusion in our group that there are many definitions of quality. And even when we look at Central Asia, we felt that official definition of quality can be quite narrow, only looking at the students' outputs like Olympiad or national scholarship testing, examination result. But we want to go further beyond that. And I think we hope that our discussions, our results will also help us to engage in a very productive discourse with our policymakers, hopefully. And we borrowed the UNICEF's model, a framework of quality, by focusing on 5 key areas. I will just name the 5 areas, but later on, if there is an opportunity, we can further discuss. The one is that about the context and environment, or teachers' conceptions of quality of physical, psychological, academic environment. 2, input. It's about teachers' conceptions of quality of inputs, like quality of teachers, curriculum delivery, and the assessment. And number 3 is the processes, or teachers' conceptions of quality in terms of processes. To what extent the quality of education is really actually taking place. Number 4 is outputs, of course, the students' outputs. And finally, we also want to look at the support, opportunities, and the resources available to really understand what is available. So what's that, all of them are interrelated, and they define the quality in our view. And therefore, all our data, both survey and statistics and qualitative interviews, we are building based on these 5 areas of components of our framework.
Thanks, Dushan. So interesting. Did I see a hand go up for a minute? Yes, I did. Moritz.
Yeah. Hi, Bronwyn.
Hi.
I was not sure if this is time for me to contribute, but I just
Please
raised
do.
my hand.
I was
going to
say at this point, we need to open up, even though I have many more questions I would love to dig into. Let's open up to others. So.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. This is Maurits Spoelder from the Education Cannot Wait, the Global Fund for Education in Emergencies. And thanks for inviting me. So I think that overview that Dushan just gave about context, input, process, output is kind of the traditional model to look at the concept of quality education. I think it's still a useful kind of framework to use when thinking about the concept of quality. And as some of you probably know, is that this whole discussion initially on quality was really input output focused. So everyone was thinking, as long as you put in teachers and we have classrooms and we have material and furniture, and if we have some data around the reading and literacy comprehension of the kids, then we know if it's a high quality system or not. And I think that model is definitely now outdated. People look much more into kind of the process. So what happens within the school environment? Is it safe for kids to learn? What happens in the classroom? What kind of pedagogies do teachers apply? And I think this is where the Schools 2030 initiative comes in very strong, to really look at what really happens in that black box, right? What happens when kids go to school, and what happens before they kind of reach their grading or their learning outcome measurement. So I think that that's really interesting, and definitely it's contextualized. You know, what's good performance of an individual student in one context is definitely not if that kid performs in the same way in another context is definitely not comparable. I think kids affected by conflict and crisis, they are 70%, 80% is under the minimum proficiency level as often set by national governments or SDG 4. So what does that mean? They're all not learning? Well, no. I mean, the progress that they make is different, and the context in which they receive quality education is different. So I think that kind of holistic view on looking at the learning environment, looking at the processes that happen within the school, and combining that with contextually relevant kind of learning outcome measurements, both on, I think what has been said earlier, on the academic side, as well as on the social emotional and safety side are aspects to look at. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Moritz. Let's open up and see if we've got any questions or comments from others. You can pop questions in the chat too. I'm happy to read those out. And also any of the panelists want to comment on what Moritz has shared on thinking about quality and learning.
Hi, Bronwyn. Just wanted to pipe in here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Andy with the Aga Khan Foundation, one of the global leads for education. And I'm actually calling in from Dodoma, Tanzania, where the government was reviewing their education sector plan for the next 5 years. And with the 200 delegates, there was a consistent question about how do we ensure the uptake of research into policy and practice. And there were so many partners in the room that emphasize we have so many evaluations. Every master's student in Tanzania is required to develop a research thesis, and yet we lack evidence for decision-making. So a question I would love to also put into the discussion is unique strategies that you are anticipating to use in the respective country contexts to ensure uptake of not only the research findings, but also how you described today, the research methodologies that perhaps can empower different constituencies to be seen, heard, and trusted.
Thanks, Andy. A great question, and also one we'll be able to dig even more into in one of our breakout groups on research impact. But I think it's a great question to think about the different constituencies that you can bring in while you think about strategies for research uptake and impact. Would any of the teams like to jump in on that and share some of their thinking?
Yes, let me try to respond. I think he's very right that in terms of these evaluation reports, but also some of the research, we have a lot in Tanzania. But one of the practical issues that I think we really have to be aware of which I'm really happy with this project, is that we are really trying to focus at the local setting. You know, if some of these research or policies that are written, they are hanging somewhere at the central level, it takes ages to trickle down to the local level. So working with the local practitioners, but also working with schools, I think this is really a way to go in future if we really want to record some positive results. So for Tanzania, I know that is one of the challenges. You know, they say the books are hanging in shelves, no one is there to read, but working with the locals, trying to find a solution together, I think that is a way forward. Thank you. Over from me. I just wanted to respond a bit on that.
Thanks, Wendelin, a great response. Sometimes impact is more strategic, focused at the local level and not always going up to the national. Any others want to chime in on this question?
I actually wanted to, sorry, I wanted to just sort of echo what Moritz said earlier about doing away with like the black box in between input and output. And I think, you know, what we're really interested in doing is looking at sort of the mechanism that's causing these variations, right? So not just saying like, hey, look, there are cultural or contextual differences, but really being able to say, you know, or take a first pass at trying to just explain why these cultural or contextual differences exist, hopefully like with as much specificity as possible. So, you know, like in our sort of existing data on picture comprehension, what we've found is that, you know, the variable that really predicts kids learning from pictures doesn't really just seem to be about, you know, like generally having pictures. It's not about just owning picture books, but it's really about whether they looked at picture books with their caregiver in the past week. And that seems to be the best predictor. So being able to, you know, just pinpoint these kinds of variables that might be driving variation and change, just, you know, at a really specific level, even to the point where we might be able to sort of give specific dose response estimates, you know, hopefully one day down the line where we can actually say, you know, for example, like this is exactly how much picture experience you need before you kind of start getting it or something like that. But yeah, really just trying to like demystify why variation exists in the first place.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Really exciting to hear about. Anyone else like to raise a question, a comment, or respond to anything you've heard so far? I see I've got a comment from Dushan in the chat. And Dushan's commenting on the method you use when thinking about how to get the voices of different education stakeholders in for policy impact. And said the choice was made not to conduct participatory action research. However, engaging participants in meaningful discussions and reflecting with them about their practices will give them a sense of self-efficacy. Thanks, Dushan. Oh, Renaud, you have your hand raised. Sorry, I'm here scanning the chat. Please go ahead.
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on what Andy said, because I think research uptake is a very big topic. It's also, I mean, apparently it's a big topic in Tanzania, which I'm thrilled about, but it's also definitely a big topic in the global educational research, you know, community, the B2s, and, you know, all of the CIS are all talking about research uptake and how can we do it. And I think, you know, what Simon just said, oh, sorry, I don't know, Simon, it's Vendelin, Simon, I guess. You just said, I think is really key, right? Engaging with a local, thinking about impact, but also thinking about scale in terms of optimal scale and not necessarily nationwide scale. You know, the bigger scale is not necessarily the one that will work, and even less in positive deviance, actually, like Schools 2030 and Data Must Speak and other research projects. But I also think that a co-creation of research, I know that it's a keyword that we're all throwing out there now, but I think, you know, really trying to understand what are the Ministry of Education in the participating country, what are their priorities? How is the research answering those priorities? Embedding, you know, from the get-go in the concept notes, in documents, making sure that you engaged with the high level folks that you need the high level folks in governments, you know, to be engaged, because you need buy-in, but you also need those technical folks, the one that will not leave as soon as there will be a new government or a coup. And so engaging with them from the get-go, doing what we call, I mean, with Data Must Speak, we call it the learning by doing approach, which is, and again, and this is very painful, it takes a lot of time. It can take like a year to do something that would take us a month, you know, just with a consultant and a contractor, but really doing this data analysis, really doing this data cleaning with the technical folks from the ministry and local academics. We think that it's key. It has worked in the past, not necessarily with Data Must Speak because we're still very young, but before that, we're still, you know, the research just started, but before that I was working with IPA in Ghana. And, you know, we co-created for 3 years the teaching at the right level, or what they now call differentiated learning, with all of the different agencies at the Ministry of Education in Ghana and the Ghana Education Service. And what we saw is, you know, thanks to this co-creation and a robust evaluation, this is now getting scaled up to 10,000 schools. And we think that this is because really people, high-level people, but also technical people from the ministry were pushing to include this because they were the one who created it. They were the one who tailored the content, both the implementation, but also the research. So research co-creation from the get-go and research co-implementation, I think could be important and something that we can discuss in one of the breakout rooms.
Thanks, Renaud. And indeed, in the breakout room that you'll be facilitating on research impact, if I'm serving right from memory. That's great. And a really good point that it's about not just about the research, but who you're connecting and working with right from the get-go. We have just a couple of minutes before we're going to move to break and then into breakout rooms. Is there any final question or comment anybody would like to float? Any of our, oh yeah, please.
Yeah, this is Bela. So I mean, we haven't heard much about technology at all. And I'm just wondering, from all the countries, how they are looking at technology or edtech in their researches, because I know we will be talking about it in the breakout rooms, but I am interested to see how this is being posited in the cross-country researches, and what kind of a role does it play, in the way we, evolve our research paths or interrogation paths in these countries. Is there? I just was keen to know whether, because that hasn't come up.
Yeah, thanks, Bela. And it's a really important question. And I think it felt even more pressing in the past 18 months with all of the different rolling school closures. So teams, are others sort of grappling with questions around the use of ed tech or perhaps using or innovating with education technology in your research?
We'll catch up in the breakout room.
Maybe we'll catch up on that on the breakout room. And Bela will be leading a session on looking at that on the impact of COVID on the rise of education technology and the implications it has, both positive and negative, for education equity, and particularly thinking about many of our core geographies, which are very deep rural areas, and the limitations and opportunities of education technology. So with that sort of plug for the breakout rooms, I'm going to, in a minute, release us for 5 minutes of break. Do take it, step away from your screen, give a stretch, grab a glass of water, because when we return, we're going to move into 3 different breakout groups. They're thematic breakout groups. We have facilitators lined up to get you talking. So get your mouth muscles ready. Take the stretch you need, and we'll see you back, please, in exactly 5 minutes. Thank you. I'm muted. Thanks, Lucia. Nice to have that background music. And with the music being cut, I'm going to say that must mean break is up and it's time for everybody to join again. So thank you very much for coming back after your 5-minute break and not allowing it to distract you or pull you into your inbox or anything like that. We're about to move into a set of breakout groups. Thanks, Sarah, for putting that up. Very, very helpful. So we're going to move into breakout groups, and we're going to spend half an hour in those breakout groups. Now, due to the number of people we have, it's logistically very difficult to have you sign up for a specific group. We think all of the groups are so interesting and engaging, you'll probably be happy wherever you're put. However, if you find you're put into a group and maybe you're there with some colleagues and you had hoped to go to a different group or to spread out, there will be a button that says return to the main room. You can return to the main room and Lucia can help you get into the group that you really want to be in. But other than that, we're going to assume you'll be happy where you are randomly placed. The breakout groups, just to run them down for you, breakout group 1 will focus on evidence uptake and systems change, and that will be facilitated by Renaud from UNICEF Innocenti. The second breakout group is going to focus on research methods and on co-creating and co-generating research evidence with schools, and that will be facilitated by Stephen Barry from OISE. from OISE University of Toronto. That's where I did my PhD as well. So I'm using the shorthand that other non-OISE folks may not recognize. And then finally, Breakout Group 3, as Bela was bringing this topic up just before break, will focus on COVID-19, education equity, and the evolving role of education technology in raising learning outcomes. And Bela will facilitate that. So Lucia will now put us into those groups. I would like to remind, please, the facilitators / the AKF point person I've already asked in each group to please hit record so we can get that recorded, so those who aren't in a specific breakout group can hear the recording later. I'm going to ask the facilitators to please remember when we come back after 30 minutes, I will ask you to share some of the interesting discussion points that came out so we can have a little report back. And I think that's all that I'm going to remind you of. So again, please be appreciative of the technical difficulties of selecting your own group. But if it is quite important to you to be in a specific group, just hit that return to main room button and Lucia will sort you out. Otherwise, enjoy the discussion and we'll see you back here in 30 minutes.
Bronwyn?
Yes.
Are you going to send the facilitators automatically, or do we have to put
I think the
ourselves in somehow?
facilitators will be in the right room. Lucia will
Okay, perfect.
this with her technical brilliance.
Off you go. Okay. Yeah, Baila, you're in the third group. Yes.
Back, those who are back. I'll just wait a minute as the other groups venture back in. I think we're just about there now. Great, thanks so much. And you know what, Sarah, I think we can perhaps leave the screen sharing because I'll just invite each one of the facilitators to just take a couple of minutes to share a little bit about what happened in their breakout group, what was discussed, what was learned, any interesting points that came up. I was in a breakout group facilitated by Stephen, who by my camera is sitting right next to me on my screen. A really interesting conversation around participatory research methods. And I think, you know, there was a lot to talk about and we could have spoken a lot more, but Stephen, I'll turn it over to you to see if you have any reflections on some of the interesting points that came out of our group's conversation.
Well, several of the things that came up over and over again were about the human side of doing research, so that teachers and other stakeholders will not feel that they're being assessed, monitored, or evaluated in some way. And then that meant that we talked a lot about the combination of quantitative and qualitative methods so that we get to know the people that we're working with, and that teachers, parents, students, community members, and so on are becoming part of the team and working with us. And that requires us to work side by side, get to know each other, and develop a certain amount of trust. And perhaps through learning how to do action research and other types of research on your own by being involved as a partner in the research process. And other than that, you can predict probably what we were saying in a lot of detail.
Thanks so much, Stephen, and thanks a lot for facilitating that discussion, and to everybody in the group. It was a really interesting one, and looking forward to taking up some of those themes again. I'll turn over now to Renaud, who was facilitating Breakout Group 1, which focused on the uptake of research.
Sure, thanks, Bronwyn, and thanks, Stephen, for doing such a great job at summarizing the first group, because now I need to do a great job at summarizing my group, and it was a very productive one. Let me try to convey the main ideas. We talked about research uptake, we talked about system change, and how do we do this as a research project, as an implementation project. And we had several ideas coming from everybody in the group, so thank you so much, everybody. First of all, co-creation of research with all relevant stakeholders. It means government, but it also means parents and students. It's about making sure that we're generating useful evidence. And so to do this, sometimes we need to give, most of the time, we need to give agencies to parents and students, and making sure that we even feedback our findings, our research findings, to them. We also talked about engaging with ministries of education to make sure that we're linking research to ESA and ESP, something that Andy mentioned, as part of a B2 conversation in the chat before we broke out in the breakout rooms, but also sharing findings in local language and creating outputs, research outputs, which are not 100-page, reports, which are policy briefs, which are short, concrete, and really straight to the point, focusing on the recommendation for decision makers at national level, but also for school level stakeholders, which I believe actually is what Schools 2030 is trying to do with, this website combination of all of the 1,000, I think, solutions. Then John and Lauren discussed, forming advisory committees from the early stages of the research and kind of adding different government departments, different ministries, departments, so that we make sure that we are engaging every single people, high level, but also technical people that needs to be involved. And I think John gave the example of the National Bureau of Statistics, which, we cannot forget. Then Lauren also mentioned too much evidence. Sometimes we just arrive in contexts where there's just too much evidence. It's overwhelming, and so there are some efforts. I believe the KICS is doing it, but other stakeholders are doing it, of coordinating to make sure coordinating with evidence producers, through dissemination events, but also roundtables. Finally, two last points. Nafisa mentioned policy, the funding. And I think she was trying to say that, multilaterals and bilateral stakeholders are really the one that are also shaping kind of the agenda in certain countries. And so we need to make sure that the evidence is also fed to them so that they know actually how, if they're going to shape, certain ESAs and ESPs with their funding. And I think we mentioned GPE, we also mentioned the local education groups. We need to make sure that they have the latest evidence that is being produced in the country. Finally, something where Jacobs Foundation and Dubai Cares got involved with EDI, which is really about why is research uptake such a new topic, such an innovative topic? And I think this is really because a lot of researchers were actually, prioritizing publishing papers. This is how in university, this is kind of like their credit. This is how they are, kind of engaged. And so Georgia and the Dubai Care Nadine, ask the question, how can donors help shift the system so that we don't just fund research that is going to help, the academic world, but also really helping the in-country implementation and policy influence. I hope I summarized it. It was so rich, Bronwyn. Thank you, everybody.
That's great, Renaud, and it's great to have just gotten a little flavor of all of that rich discussion, and also to see some of the common threads, in fact, between our different rooms around stakeholder engagement from the outset. So really, really interesting. Look forward to listening to the recording of that. And then finally, let's turn to our third group, which was facilitated by Bela and focused on EdTech, education equity, and particularly COVID-19. I know Bela was having trouble with connection before. Are you there, Bela? I can see you lit up, but I'm not sure that your audio is coming through. I don't know if anybody else, while we're waiting for Bela, anyone else from that group maybe can pipe in and summarize. I know, Andy, you were in that group. I don't know if you want to share some reflections while we wait for Bela's audio.
And in the meantime, I'll check with Bela Bronwyn.
Oh, that's great. Thanks.
Oh, I wish Bela could speak because it was phenomenal. So I would just say and recommend to everyone listen to the session. I think there was a lot covered. Bela, just interrupt me if you can start talking. So I wasn't prepared to sort of summarize.
And so, put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. But maybe if others want to come in, but I think three areas that we were questioning was one, around technologies that are affordable, accessible to the most marginalized and to the masses. Yes, Bela, are you in? All right, that was my last.
Says she can't connect.
She was beautifully clear in the breakout rooms. Maybe there was a secret. So let me just go through these three, and then perhaps Bela can enhance.
Can you hear me? Andrew?
Yes. Yes, go ahead.
been just terrible.
Bela, go ahead. It's ironic that this is the ed tech group, of course, of course.
Can
So
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay, I'm going to go for it. So mass technologies, particularly emphasis on remembering TV, radio, but there was also an emphasis on how might we be enhancing the opportunities with mobile phone-based applications, and also opportunities to ensure that the basic literacy and numeracy skills and knowledge are acquired, but also how might these basic technology also provide opportunities for enhancing and promoting social emotional learning. I think there was some bold aspirations of making all of our education interventions be available both offline and online, and be accessible through these various technologies. The second is the question around perhaps how we think about the linkages between perhaps the data and the evidence that's being generated around learning outcomes and the explanatory factors that also could be collected around socioeconomic status, around geography, around gender, and perhaps technology and also our approach, our different approach to research around education technology and learning could also bring that particular data in a more accessible, digestible, and fast way for decision makers at local, national, and global levels to consider in enhancing our approach to co-creation. And then the third area, and I'm taking privilege because this was my contribution, so I know this one the best, but the interplay between power. So in ed tech, are we having our government partners be convinced by the ed tech for profit and the venture capitalists? Or are we having our government partners be informed by those who are investing in public goods and perhaps the nonprofit sector? And how might evidence and the focus on how we generate that evidence be the common thread between and through an ecosystem that can benefit systems? Emma, Moritz, Rebecca had incredible contributions that Bela could enhance. But Bela, I see perhaps you're back. Just seeing a different screen.
Well, I'm coming and going. I just thought that Rebecca made a great point when she said that the research really has to be far more nuanced to say really what is the impact and efficacy of EdTech in different cultures and different systems, and also it cannot take away from the parental engagement or the touch of the parent and the communication at that level with a technology being handed over. So there's a lot of contextual aspect to it, but I think what Saurabh pointed out from the Bihar study is so important, that while the government scaled up all different forms of technology, from television to WhatsApp to online and so on, there was a huge gap on the supply side and the demand, from as far as the interpretation of the demand by the parents, who really did not quite understand what was there on offer. And of course, the pointing out of the challenges of equity within families and how the girls really were at the bottom of the line when it came to access to their father's telephones, etc. But generally what came out from the group was that the potential of technology remains hugely untapped, and it will be fascinating to look at what is the uptake on technology in different contexts. How do the schools really engage, and the entire stakeholders engage with technology, and does it become a leveler, or does it really enhance the digital divide that is already there? Because when we're looking at the different wealth quartiles, it really varies from context to context, and from the income level, the socioeconomic status of the household, and what access they may have. So of course there are great stories to tell from each context of how the edtech companies, not for profit, and even for profit, manage to create a public good. Is technology a public good? Is it going to be a leveler? But there's a huge potential out there, which I think both Porticus and education cannot wait, for example, are testing out in different contexts, but much more needs to really be unpacked in this work. I'll just stop at that. I'm so sorry about this terrible technology challenge of internet here. Sorry about that, but the group was fantastic.
Thank you so much, Bela, and nothing to apologize for. You've just come through very, very clearly. And while you were reconnecting, Andy spoke a little bit about your discussion as well.
So, I know. Thank you, Andy.
And I've heard that it was a really, really great breakout group. So looking forward to hearing the recording on that. I'd like to now just take a minute to invite anybody else to share any reflections from their room. If there was anything perhaps that came up that the facilitator hasn't flagged that you think might be interesting for others, it's an opportunity to get your word in. Great, a sign of excellent facilitators and excellent summarizers. So thank you very much. Oh,
I just wanted to say, is technology the elephant in the room? And I think it's nice to see how it really, and just like to see, how it really unpacks in this context. I'll be fascinated, and especially in some of the remote areas there where we will be working.
Yeah, absolutely, Bela. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, and because rolling school closures continue to be the norm in so many of our contexts. So it continues to be such an important issue. So an ongoing conversation to be continued, I am sure. And with that, I would just like to thank everybody so much for your participation today. Of course, I want to send the biggest thanks to all of our research teams, our teams from ITA, Pakistan, Zizi Afrique, and Opera Consulting, from University of Nazarbayev and University of Toronto and Coventry University, from UNICEF, from University of California, Berkeley, University of Dar es Salaam, University of Notre Dame, Right to Play International, University of Amsterdam, University of Texas at Austin, and Yale, all together a huge consortium of partners who are, as I said at the beginning, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We're coming together, we're exploring all of the synergies, shared concerns, shared challenges of these different research streams and the wider Schools 2030 program and the wider global education field. So this is just the first of future events where we can come together to share our learnings, to share our challenges with each other and with the big Schools 2030 family here. So a thank you to those research partners, a special thank you to Stephen, Bela, and Renaud, who were volunteered by me to facilitate those breakout discussions. And a huge thank you to Sarah and Lucia, who did so much of the background work on getting things together. And finally, a thank you to everybody, because as I said at the beginning, this is actually the first time that we've had Schools 2030 partners, research partners, technical partners, donors, staff from all of our countries, staff from our global team, all together in one place. So it's great for everybody to have come. Thank you so much for making the time across all of our time zones. For some of you, it's the crack of dawn. For some of you, it is past bedtime. So thank you for that. Thanks to everybody, and we look forward to the next conversation. Have a lovely day and evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn and the team. Lovely to hear everyone. Thank you. It was very rich.